In this video, we are going to continue looking at ID and classes, but we're going to extend the idea by using some extra CSS properties we haven't looked at. So our last file was getting a little busy, so let's make a new folder and call this 3-3-box model. We'll talk about what the box model is in a second. I'm going to make a HTML and a CSS file. Boxmodel.html and boxmodel.css. We have this template here that we're going to use if you do Control A or Command A and Control C or Command C to copy it. We can just paste it in here with Control V. Give ourselves a save, which saves a little bit of time instead of writing all this out. And then in our href here, we need to link the boxmodel.css. We'll see it pop up, and we're good to go. So we have a good starting point there. Now we will need to add some content. Let's go ahead and make a few divs. Inside the div, I'm going to call this box1. We're going to just have just some boxes in a second, and I'm just going to add some text here. And inside, at the end of this, I'm going to have 3 different boxes. I'm going to apply the CSS to each of them, the same CSS. So if I want it to be uniform and I don't want them to be different, I'm going to use a class instead of an ID. Because again, we're applying CSS to multiple things and it's the same CSS. So after the V here, I'm just going to write class. I'm going to call this box. I'm just going to save it for now. All right. And we have our first div tag. Let's do one more. I'll show you a shortcut to write this. You could type this out as we did in the last one. Another kind of faster way to do it is you can write div, and if you click tab, it'll make the tag, but you can also add a class name before you do that. In CSS, when we reference a class, we do period. So this is div, period indicates a class, and then we write the name, box. Click tab here, and it'll make the same thing, a div with a class of box. A little bit faster. So again, you can see that here. We do div dot the name and click tab. I'll call this box 2. I'll do one more. Div dot box tab box 3. Save it. Okay, and that is a good starting point for our HTML. Let's close out the Explorer. Maybe drag the CSS over here and kind of shrink some of the HTML. Before we get too far in the CSS, let's just check to make sure this is working. Reveal in File Explorer, open it up, and check to make sure that you have at least these text here. So make sure you have written this, and you just see them popping up. Nothing fancy, just the words on our document. All right. In this lesson, we're going to look at what's called the box model. So right now I'm on this website, W3 Schools. It's a pretty popular one for HTML, CSS tutorials. I'll link this in the comments as well. But the box model is just a kind of general outline of how a lot of things on websites look. We think of them almost as boxes, and we look at the spacing around different parts of the box. So when we have a content or some text or an image or something on your website, we refer to that stuff as content. So the pictures, the text we've looked at, that's all content. We talked about borders before. Borders are what go around the content. And now our 2 new properties are the space outside the border and the space inside the border. Our space inside the border, it kind of conceptually would make sense to call it padding. It's like the stuffing inside. So think of it as like padding in a couch or something equivalent. Padding is inside the border, but outside the content. So it gives us a little bit of space between our border and whatever we have written or shown. The margin is what is outside the border. So that's our space around our content in the border here. You can think of it as a Microsoft Word document when you have the margins on the left and right hand side. That's the space where nothing can get written. In a similar way, that's going to be our space where our content and all the stuff inside, it's not going to touch it. So we got these 2 properties. Let's see if we can incorporate them into our div tags. Go back here. let's start with our border. We know how to do that. I'm going to work with each of these classes called box. So in my CSS file here, I'm going to do dot, the name of the class, box. Again, a reminder that the dot is for classes. We do this squiggly bracket afterwards. Click return to push it down. Let's try our border. I'm going to use the shorthand here. Again, there's 3 properties: width, style, and color. You can do them individually, or if you want a shorthand, you can just write border. The order tends not to matter too much as long as there's an easy way to differentiate them. If I do 2 pixels for the width, solid for the style, and black for the color, this should work. Let's see. I'll save it here. This looks saved. Let's go back to our page, get a refresh. Okay, does appear to be working. It doesn't look great, but we have this space here with this edge, and around each of them it is happening. So the class is working, it's applying to each thing. And you can notice there's no spacing in this. I know there's spacing over here, but that's basically just because we haven't filled it up with text. So on our top left and bottom here, there's technically no spacing, but what's happening here with this side over the space on the right hand side, the div essentially takes up the whole width. So if there's nothing in its way, it's going to space out like that. But we can start to add some spacing to kind of make these like not butting up against the walls here. So remember, the things inside the border, the space in there, is called padding. So let's incorporate padding to start with. We'll go padding. Just the first one's fine. And then give it a number of pixels. So here I'll just give it a pixels of 20. Let's save that. Let's go over here and refresh. Okay. And you can kind of see we have this nice amount of padding around each side here. There also is some padding over here. Now the padding is uniform. There's 4 sides essentially: the top, the left, the bottom, and the right. We can also change how each side is. We can make it different than the global padding. So if I go over here and start typing padding, you'll see the options: left, right, top, bottom. Some others here we won't worry about. Just focus on these 4. Let's just do padding bottom as, I'm just going to do 100. It's going to look obnoxious, but it will get the point across. When I go back here and refresh, now you can see a bunch of space down here. So we still have the 20 pixels on the left, top, and right, but there's a lot on the bottom. Now, you can kind of get lost with like what's happening with these pixels, like which one is each number. You can explore this on most browsers by right-clicking. So depending on what browser you're on, you can right-click, and there's going to be something called like inspect or something similar. It might look different on Chrome or Mozilla. You can find it somewhere there. When you click inspect, it might look different. Maybe your screen appears down here or something, but somewhere there is a button, something like this. Select an element in the page to inspect it. If we click this and select anywhere here, now you notice over here on the right-hand side under this computed, we get a bunch of numbers. So you can see here, here's my border. My border has, oops, let's bring that back. My border has 2 pixels. And you notice over here on my website, the tools are telling me my border has 2 pixels. Additionally, the padding is 20 on the top, left, and right, and 100 on the bottom. So we can see these numbers in action. We can see the different parts here. No margin so far. All right, so we've added some padding. I'm just going to comment this out by doing Control / for now and saving it, just to make this a little bit less obnoxious. And now let's also add in the margin. If I do margin, let's just do 20 pixels and save this. Remember that margin is a space around. So if I go here and refresh, now we have space around each of these sides. Okay. Same thing with the margin. You can control each side. If we do margin left, and then we do 0 pixels, there's going to be no margin on the left. So if I save it and run it, okay. And now there's no margin. I know that it looks like a little bit one, but this right here is essentially the body. So over here we got 20, here we got 20. In between these two is probably technically 40 because we have 20 below and 20 above. Let's just check that. I'm going to inspect. I'm going to click on this here. And so we do have 20 margin. It looks like, I guess, this margin kind of is an overlap. So the 20 here, you can see that little orange area there. There's 20 below, and this one also has 20 above here. So I guess those margins are kind of overlapping like that. So that's a pretty good spot with the padding margin. We can see we got a little space here. One last thing I can show you is, let's say we didn't want all this spacing around here. We could change the width of these boxes. So right now, the width is essentially the entire screen. It takes up this entire screen. We talked about that a while ago. We did percentages. Essentially what's happening is it's 100%. It's taking up the whole thing. If we wanted to make it smaller, we could set a static amount. So you could say like 500, or I'm just going to do 200 pixels and save it. If I go over here and refresh, now we've restricted our width. It's gotten smaller because we forced it that way. And you can notice it is kind of leaning to the left here. A handy trick if you want this to go in the middle is up here in the margin, you can do auto. Let's try that, save it. I'm going to comment out the margin left, Command /. I'll save it here, click refresh. And now you can see that it is nicely put in the middle like that. We could add a little margin underneath. To do that, we would just do margin bottom, 20 pixels. Let's see if that worked. Give it a little refresh here. Okay. And now we have these kind of nicely aligned boxes. And that kind of completes the initial idea of our box model. We've seen padding and margin, how you can kind of play around with it a little bit. And after this, we can start making these things into more interesting aspects, actually like make them part of a website. But understand the box model is a kind of core component of web design. You need to understand about the border, the padding and the margin, and the difference in these three styles.